feel that based on the number of videos that raise the story of the Great Emu War, that it's time for someone to address this topic in a logical and factual manner. First of all, let's talk about the great Aussie pastime of taking the piss. For those of you who are not familiar with Australian colloquialisms, this essentially means making fun of someone due to their apparent stupidity or ignorance. It's just part of who we are as Australians, not just to take the piss out of the people around us, but also, when justified, to take the piss out of ourselves. And of course, more than anything, we just love to take the piss out of the Australian government. That's where the legend of the Great Emu War comes in. So let's dig in and find out what this really was. Okay, firstly, let's talk pronunciation. Because, like many Australians, it drives me nuts when I see people from other countries talk about emu and oots. It's pronounced emu and ute, like you. Think you saw an emu while you were driving a ute. Seriously, how hard can it be? So, what are emus, for the dummies in the back? Emus are rather large, tall, flightless Australian birds, which can be found in most areas of mainland Australia. You can't find them in Tassie anymore, thanks to the same redneck attitude towards culling them, which also led to the extinction of the thylacine, or as you may know it, the Tasmanian tiger. There were emus roaming on Maria Island in Tassie as late as the early 90s. However, thanks to tourists feeding them, they became aggressive towards people, expecting that they would be fed, and became a nuisance, so that those birds which remained on Maria Island were culled. Whilst they are flightless birds, they will travel hundreds of kilometres during a year in search of food and water. This is one of the contributing factors which led to the Emu War. Then, of course, there's their rate of reproduction to consider. In terms of population growth, while emus usually only lay one clutch of eggs each year during the summer months, they may begin producing as early as 18 months of age and can be productive for more than 20 years. With a clutch the size of 20 to 50 eggs, one emu alone can have a significant impact on population growth. Until 1922, emus were deemed to be a protected species. However, due to the impact that they were having by both eating and trampling on crops, and the damage caused to fences, which also allowed other species of animals to enter paddocks and impact on farms, the Australian government changed the status of emus to vermin. Going back a few years prior to this, following World War I, discharged veterans were given land by the government to take up farming in Western Australia, meaning that there was an increase in cultivated land and, of course, a reduction in natural foraging areas for Australian wildlife. With the onset of the Great Depression in 1929, farmers were encouraged by the government to increase wheat crops, with the promise of assistance in the form of subsidies. The government didn't follow through with their promised subsidies, so that by 1932, with no assistance from the government and for the falling price of wheat already impacting farmers, the impact of a mass migration of emus was having a devastating effect on farmers. In 1932, as a result of drought combined with the increased amounts of cultivated land, there was suddenly less natural foraging available for emus, which resulted in an unusually large migration of emus to the wheat belt in Western Australia, with the Campion district being worst hit. This, of course, led to the devastating effects on wheat crops and pressure was put on the government by farmers who were already feeling unsupported due to failed promises of farming subsidies. The rest, as they say, is history. The Australian government made the decision to launch an operation to cull emu numbers in the area and enlisted the Royal Australian Artillery soldiers, armed with Lewis machine guns, to undertake the task. This operation lasted barely a month, and due to the fact that it was a monumental failure, it was given the somewhat tongue-in-cheek name the Emu War by the Australian media, in recognition of the fact that it was a complete utter farce. Apparently, there was a belief that Australian military men with combat experience from World War I would have the capability of successfully carrying out this culling operation. However, it was somewhat apparent from the very start that they were totally out of their league when it came to tackling the emu problem. As foragers, emus tend to spread out over a large area whilst grazing. This, of course, meant that once startled by gunshots, they would scatter and flee. This, combined with an ability to travel at speeds of up to 50 kilometres per hour, meant that they were far from easy targets. Attempts were made to herd them into one area, which of course proved to be even more challenging than attempting to herd cats, and was of course met with failure, as upset emus scattered in every direction. Attempts were also made to chase emus with a gun mounted on a truck. The problem, of course, being that the rough terrain, combined with the far from advanced vehicle engineering of the day, meant that not only were they unable to keep pace with the emus, but they were unable to fire any shots whilst the truck was moving because of how bumpy it was. Within the first 6 days of the operation, they used around 2,500 rounds of ammunition, successfully culling somewhere around 50 to 200 birds. With such an embarrassing lack of success, combined with considerable negativity from the media and subsequently from the public, the operation was called off after only 6 days. Following the decision to call off the operation, farmers once again began pressuring the government for assistance, as emus were still invading farms by the thousands. Subsequently, the men returned to the field on the 13th of November and claimed to be achieving greater success, with official figures saying they had killed 100 emus per week. Of course, given their red faces after their initial foray, I suspect that these numbers were perhaps slightly exaggerated in order to save face. On the 10th of December, having lasted for barely a month, the operation was called off once and for all. According to official statistics, they had used nearly 10,000 rounds of ammunition and killed just short of 1,000 emus. 10 rounds per confirmed kill. Figures do differ, however, with some sources claiming that the number of emus culled was closer to 200 than 1,000. The media of the time viewed the entire operation as being somewhat of a farce, as is evidenced in many contemporary articles, some examples being these. The machine gunner's dreams of point-blank fire into serried masses of emus were soon dissipated. The Emu Command had evidently ordered guerrilla tactics, and its unwieldy army soon split up into innumerable small units that made use of the military equipment uneconomic. A crestfallen field force therefore withdrew from the combat area after about a month. And then there's this one. If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. They can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks. They are like Zulus whom even dum-dum bullets could not stop. In later years, farmers called for further culls, but the government instead offered a bounty for killed emus. Thankfully, this didn't have quite as much of a disastrous effect as the bounty on the Tassie tiger, and emus are still around today to bask in their success. Throughout the 1930s, farmers chose to take a different approach to the issue of emus damaging crops, and it became practice to erect exclusion barrier fencing, which would of course keep out animals such as rabbits and dingoes also. In 1975, the Wildlife Act was put into place. This law gives emus protected status, so that permits are now required for both culling operations and farming of emus for meat. So, was there ever a great emu war? No. Quite simply, the term simply came about to describe an epic failure of a culling operation, and has somehow become part of urban legend along with the ferocious drop bear. Thanks for watching. If you've liked my video, please help me out by clicking the like button, hit subscribe, and leave a comment below.